Hi, I'm EXO, and today is Vincent Van Vega's birthday. He follows the channel, he hangs out on Discord, he's been a great supporter of the project, and he requested that I do a video about FMV games. So let's go ahead and switch on over here to Launchbox. I like to have things in platform category normally. It allows me to jump around and see all the different areas really easily. But in this case, once I've highlighted MS-DOS, I'm going to come over to genre. And if we're looking for FMV games, the trick's going to be to go to Interactive Movie. And this list is 58 games long, and it will be games that are either FMV games straight or like FMV games. Interactive Movies is, I thought, a better overarching genre, mainly because FMV hadn't really taken off yet in the DOS days. FMV was definitely a product of the CD-ROM generation. And while there were clearly many DOS games that were released on CD-ROM, one thing DOS did not have was a really practical, high-performing MPEG decoder. And that's why you had the RealMagic cards that came out later that had MPEG decoding built into them, which we do have in eXoDOS. But more than that was when Windows 3.1 came along, because Windows 3.1 allowed you to have decoders like QuickTime or a video for Windows. And that allowed much higher compression, which then in turn allowed you to have much more video on a single disc. You look at a game like Phantasmagoria, and I think that's what, like 7 CDs? And that's not a minuscule amount. And while a blank CD was only a few cents later in the decade, at that time they were still 20, 30 cents, I would guess. I'm guessing here to the manufacturer. But when you're talking about 7 of these, say they're 50 cents a piece, we're talking a couple dollars per game you're producing. And a couple dollars per game is a pretty high margin. There's, we're talking about a time when you had pretty thick cardboard boxes, a lot of printed manuals and extras and copy protection. And if it was like an Infogam game, you had little feelies that were hiding in there that you could play with. So the more CDs you had, and I believe at the time the CD was still more expensive than a floppy, just because it was new technology. If someone knows, I'd love to hear, but that's my guess, is that, especially 92, 93, 94, at that point, I'm pretty sure CDs were more expensive than floppies. Now, on to the topic at hand here. FMV games. Let's take a look through the list and see what we got here. The Crime Patrol games, you'll notice there's 2 of them. That's because one is base Crime Patrol, and the other one is the RealMagic version. Since we're talking about FMV games, we might as well dig in and talk about the RealMagic a little bit. The RealMagic MPEG decoder card was an ISA slot card that you put in your machine, and a game had to be programmed for it to take advantage of it. And it could not decode a standard MPEG video file any better than your normal computer could. So you had to have a high quality MPEG file. And, AC came on, 1 second. There we go. And it also had to have a key in the beginning of it that told the card how to decode it. This is the Wild West. Things were not standardized by any means. And reading through the GitHub commits on the RealMagic emulation, it's been really crazy watching. Like, almost every game has, like, I think when they first got it working, maybe 3 games right off the bat worked, but then the next ones didn't. So they had to figure out, oh, there's a different key to these games. If you've ever done NES emulation, there's something called a mapper. And a mapper told the NES how it was going to run that game. It was like a little configuration that loaded before the game. And early Nintendo emulation could only handle the base mappers. Either because the games that used the more advanced mappers weren't common enough to be worth building special code for, or because when the emulators were built, they didn't take into account the fact that there were different mappers. Later ones, which used a lot more resources, did take that into account. So they are still figuring out some of the keys on the RealMagic games that are out there. What you're going to notice when you play a RealMagic game is much clearer video comparatively. Just higher quality in general. Now, the RealMagic card did not sell very well. It didn't stick around very long. And it even, as you see here, it's spelled REEL Magic. But then later it was REAL Magic. And while it's not documented specifically as far as I can tell why the name changed, my best guess is there was a lawsuit. Maybe Real Cheese came after them, yeah, because they've got the little registered trademark on Real. Kidding. But someone made it hard for them, so they renamed the company. The other potential, maybe, is they didn't get sued. They just didn't have great quality control, and that would not surprise me either. The company did not last very long. Moving forward here, we've got The Dame Was Loaded. This is a kind of a mystery detective game. You go around, you hear people talk, you pick up clues. Crime Patrol was a light gun shooter, but on the computer you can use your mouse to click on things. Dracula Unleashed is another, you're watching a movie play out, you're moving around, collecting clues and information. The Dragon's Lair games, if you've never played them, are pretty stunning. Don Bluth was a Disney animator, and he spun off and decided to make his own animation company. And someone had the amazing idea when Laserdisc came out to put a bunch of scenes on a Laserdisc, and that scene would play, and the same way you would hit a button on your remote control to move left, right, up, or down on a menu, the game was waiting for an input of a certain key, and it branched off. If you didn't hit the right input, it played the animation of you dying. If you did hit the right input, it went to the next scene that would take place chronologically in the story. Now, that would mean you could memorize the game. So they did things like, there was lots of little cheats, tricks they could do to make the game seem more complex than it really was. They would flip the scene. So maybe you come out and there's a bridge, you got to cross the bridge, and something comes at you from the left-hand side, so you got to hit right on the stick to get past it. Well, next time you play, it might just flip the scene, which means you got to go left now because the thing's coming from the right. It sounds basic, but this is a very, very fast-paced game. You don't have a lot of time, and your only inclination as to which way to go in the beginning are little flashes of light, and you pretty much have to hit it on the flash. I don't know that it's possible to beat the game on reflexes alone. I'm pretty sure it's going to be trial and error. I know from my personal experience playing it, you just build up memory after a while. And while you can't memorize the game front to back, you do memorize scenes, so the second a scene kicks off, you kind of know, okay, I got to go up, left, right, down, attack, right, jump, move. And the next scene comes up, and you have to quickly figure out what scene you're on, because if you don't, you're going to die. There was quite a few of these. There's this one we're highlighting right now is actually the floppy release of the game in '89. Then there's the RealMagic release, and then the CD-ROM version from '93. The CD-ROM version was close to the arcade. The RealMagic version is pretty much identical to the arcade. You've also got Dragon's Lair 2 Time Warp, 3 The Curse of Mordred, and there's even one called Escape from Singe's Castle, which I don't know how it falls in chronologically, but based on the dates, it came after 2, but before 3, so maybe that's where it fits, or it could be a spin-off too. Crime Patrol 2, we saw one up here, Drug Wars. The Crime Patrol games, both of them, have a really tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. They really lean in to the sensibility of silliness. You look here and you can see, like, your difficulty levels are wimpy, rough, and tough. I mean, yeah, different menu system between the two, the RealMagic version and the regular version. Flash Traffic's another RealMagic game that we have 2 versions of. Again, this is going to be more of an actual movie, and you're going to make some choices in it. Fort Boyard is a really strange one. This is like a game show that I think was in France. Is that right? Does it say here? I'm pretty sure it was France. For some reason I want to say it might have been Canadian. No, Mike Royds is the publisher. This is a French game. Far and easily away. They would film this game. It was a real game show, and they on TV, and they would film it at this like fort that was out in the middle of the ocean. And in a way, it has a very strong Japanese game show sensibility to it. Very strange games that they're playing, but also kind of a precursor to a show like Survivor, where they're trying to. There's an endurance test taking place. I have not actually played this version, but it is multiplayer, so you can play it like a game show. And if I remember correctly from when I got it running, it's a lot of strange little scenes with a pretty simple mini game behind it. Guy Spy, which one is this one? Doesn't sound familiar at all to me. Okay, so this is like an animated FMV game, action shooter. It's going to be very similar to the other ones. Another animated one. This is going to be a reaction-based game. We got Kids on Sight. That was actually released on CD as well. Sega CD. Digital Pictures was well known for a lot of their games. They did Slam City with Scottie Pippen. They did Supreme Warrior. I know there's a few others. Those two mainly come to mind. With Supreme Warrior, you had left hand and right hand and block, and it was about memorizing the attacks. When you saw this coming in, block, pop, 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 pop. But you're watching a movie at the end of the day, so. I remember I scraped together my money for a whole summer to buy a Sega CD. And I went down to Funko Land, which was an old used game store. And I think it was $250 for a used Sega CD at the time. And it came with Sewer Shark in a sleeve, which I think might even be in here. No, there is no Sewer Shark on DOS. Well, better for you then, because it was not a good game. Not good at all. But so many games on the Sega CD were FMV games, and they felt futuristic at the time. Now, the irony is, they didn't sell very well. And the systems that leaned into them, the CDI, the 3DO had a decent number on there, definitely the Sega CD. Many of them failed because of their dependency on these games. Yet now we're in a renaissance of them. Suddenly games like Night Trap and Double Switch, they're coming back and they're being re-released. I recently got a 4K remaster of Corpse Killer, which was a Sega CD game. It was actually one of only 6 if you count a single game that was released in Brazil. But there was the Sega CD and the 32X, and you could put them together, and basically the 32X acted like an MPEG decoder, like the RealMagic card. So you had higher quality video. And believe me, that was necessary. The artifacting on a Sega CD game was horrible. It's almost difficult to tell what you're looking at sometimes. But the 32X cleaned that up significantly. So I like collecting console games, but I'm not a completionist by any means. However, I do have one set complete, and that is the 32X Sega CD. All 5 of them. Now, I said there were 6. There was one game that was released in Brazil only for the Sega CD 32X. I don't have that one. I think I've got a ROM of it somewhere. But finding it's very difficult. Finding a copy in a box that's in good condition is difficult. So I consider my collection complete, despite that loss. The Last Express is a really cool game. If I remember correctly, this is Jordan Mechner, the same fellow who did Prince of Persia. And the whole game was done using rotoscoping. Movies like Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings were done using rotoscope, where they film. There's another one, Waking World, based on the Philip K. Dick novel, Waking Dreams. I can't remember. It was a movie that Keanu Reeves was in. It was also rotoscoped. That was in the early mid-2000s. But rotoscoping is when you film a person and then you go back over and you animate on the actual frame. So it leads to a very realistic movement, which you can see the precursor to that in Prince of Persia, the way the prince would move and jump, and it had such a flow to it. So Last Express was actually filmed and drawn on top of. It's an animated game with a mystery behind it. Kingdom and Shadowin, which is Kingdom Part 2, are both much like the Dragon's Lair. It's a cartoon that's playing with the reaction times behind it. Bounty Hunter is another light gun game. You can see a pattern here, right? We got our reaction timing action games, our light gun games, and our adventure/mystery games. That's pretty much what we're dealing with. Lawnmower Man is a little bit of a combination. It's got the action adventure. It's got some scenes where you're floating down on a locked path and you're shooting at stuff. This one here is an interesting one. Rocket Science Games was primed to be a really big company. When they were first announced, they were made up of kind of a who's who of a couple other developers that had started to fold, and everyone thought that Rocket Science was going to be massive. Wired Magazine did an article on them before they even released their first game and talked to them up big time. And then they came out with Lodestar, which is basically like a Sewer Shark game. And then they also put out Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, which I'm kind of surprised I didn't see that. I guess that one's a little less FMV, but it probably should be on this list. I think I need to add it. They both flopped horribly. and they were meant to just cash in real quick on. It was meant to give a quick game that could make and knock out because they were working on a bigger game idea. But I think Duke Nukem Forever is a good example of what happens when you're holding out for that really big game and you keep pushing it, never releasing something. Los Justiceros is another light gun game, clearly. Lost Eden is an adventure movie. It has a little bit of Dinotopia feel to it, like this world with dinosaurs. But it's pretty bad CG. Not great, especially not for the year it came out in '95. If you've ever been to an arcade, you probably know Mad Dog McCree. It's another shooter. Man Enough is a pretty nutty game. This is a adventure game, but it's more of a dating simulator. You go on dates, you talk to women. I'd say it's fairly counterintuitive. If you say the things that are respectful, that would probably get you a date today, you'll get laughed off as being kind of a weenie. But then there'll always be the option that's like incredibly crass. That's generally not the way to go. But the game does encourage you to be fairly forward. And it kind of has that, what they call it back in like the 90s, or 2000s. There was that type of dating, a lot of peacocking, negging, all that crap that kind of the whole incel world was built on later. There's a little bit of that vibe going on. But you take that out of it, and it's still a really hilarious game to play based on the silliness of the acting in it, and the amount of struggle you go through for a game that ultimately, if I remember correctly, there's nothing adult about it. It's just insinuated sometimes. You've got MTV's Club Dead, which, so way back in eXoDOS version 3 when I added this game, I put a little Easter egg, kind of a silly joke in it, and every once a year I get a message saying, "Hey, I saw your joke," and I just figured if anything represented like Club Dead, and like, this game came out in '94, but when I put this pack together in 2015, no, I'm sorry, I did that pack back in 2008, which was like kind of the Jersey Shore was kind of big at that point, and I thought if anything, if I had to have one picture that represented a Club Dead of MTV in that time period, it was those guys. You got Night Trap, which is a really well-known game from the Sega CD. It is one of the reasons, but not the only reason, that we have the ESRB. Congress was convinced that a game about vampires attacking women was highly sexual, and it caused it to get an M rating, which is a complete joke by today's standards. I encourage you to play it, check it out, and see how silly it is. It's silly. You've got Phantasmagoria 2 on the list because it was much more of a movie. 1, while digital, is not an interactive movie. It's more of an actual a point-and-click adventure game where you're walking around and clicking on things. But 2 went the full, like, I think Gabriel Knight 2 did it as well, which, did we not have that on the list? See, just talking about it, I'm seeing games that should be on the list that aren't. Gabriel Knight 2 should be on this list. 3, I believe, was the one that went full-on, like, really bad 3D graphics. The 5th Police Quest game, SWAT, was full motion. Now, Police Quest SWAT 2 is freaking awesome. It's, you actually have your guys, you lay them out, it's isometric, sprite-based, which sprite is so hard to find at that point when it came out. And you'll put each time you play, it can play out a little bit differently. I had so much fun playing SWAT 2. SWAT 1, not so much. Psychic Detective is a decent amount of fun. I think I played that one first in a 3DO, if I remember correctly. Ripper, at 6 CDs, is one of the larger games in eXoDOS. Take-Two interacted to this one, which was getting well known at the time for Grand Theft Auto and those kind of games. The Sacred Ground and Elk Moon Murder are both in the Santa Fe Mystery series. Again, we're watching movies, solving mysteries. You got the Sherlock Holmes games that we're very proud of being on CD-ROM. But when you look at their date, 92, 93, 91, I think. Yep. That was pretty early for CD-ROM. You got your Slam City game I mentioned earlier. You get to go one-on-one with some different basketball players. Incredible, each one a little harder than the last, with your ultimate boss being Scottie Pippen. The Space Ace games are just like Dragon's Lair. Soldier Boys, I don't know that one personally, but I can tell by looking at the screenshot we're talking about another mouse shooter light gun type game here. Apparently, according to the description down here, it was an HBO exclusive movie. And they took the movie and converted the movie into a shooter for the PC. That's interesting. Okay. We got Space Pirates over here, which is a pretty silly one. American Laser Games did it, which if you see that, you know it's a light gun game. Speed is a really unique one. It's more of a... So there was an IMAX movie called Speed, and they took that IMAX movie and just made it interactive. You can click through and watch different clips in different orders. If you're a Star Trek fan, you got the board game, which is surprising that this one made it to DOS because it was also released natively for Windows 3X. And that one is encoded differently, if I remember correctly. That one actually does use QuickTime. Most of the time, if a company released a game for QuickTime, it did not get a DOS port since QuickTime did not run in DOS. A good example of this is Black Dahlia. That was an adventure mystery game. I have a copy. I didn't bring it because I didn't know I'd be talking about it. But it actually says MS-DOS on the system requirements as being supported for DOS. That led to it being erroneously listed on Moby Games and several other DOS listings. It is not for DOS. As a matter of fact, my copy, when you open it up, I bought the copy trying to find a DOS version because it was on so many lists. And inside was a little printed piece of paper that said, at the last second, DOS support was not included. Sorry, it's Windows 3.1 only. And I think it's funny. There could have been nothing last second about it. Like, you had to have known that your 5 or 6 CD based game, you're not going to be able to use the same video on DOS that you use in Windows 3.1. You're going to use something like Smacker on DOS or a different kind of compression technique that you're not going to use on Windows. But you're also not going to release the same game with 10 CDs. 5 for DOS and 5 for Windows. My guess is they printed those boxes up in manuals like way before the game was done. And then by the time they got through, they're like, just print a little piece of paper on the printer. And I can picture them sitting up and like cutting little strips and putting them in every box. I do tend to wonder how many people cared by that point, because it's a later game, so I don't know if people were mad about that, because there's a lot of games that in this time period were advertising features that they didn't actually ship with. Moving forward here, Synergist is kind of fun to pull out. It's an interactive movie, but it does have a little more interactivity than your typical FMV game. This one, I think we just got our hands on this a year ago, and I've been looking for it for over 10 years. If you look on eBay, you can find the CDI version all day and night, but I could not find a PC version, even though it was listed as having a PC release. It's a very strange game. You play a guy who's on set while they're filming an episode of Thunder in Paradise. And you're like a kid. And they show the kid hanging out with the crew playing video games. And the whole crew is like around the kid like, yeah, awesome. He's so good. It's really a strange game. Because it's... By the fact that it makes you out to be a kid hanging with the crew, it automatically tells you who you are. So if you're not a kid, you're like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to just pretend I'm a kid. But the crew talks to you like you're a little kid the whole time too. And then you do like little mini games like, all right, we're going to go out and do a scene on the boat now. We're going to have you run special effects on the little missiles that are coming off the boat. So you're going to hit the button over here and that'll control the joystick and that'll look like it's got a whole thing behind it. I think there might be a meta game where like while they're filming the episode, something actually comes up and they have to fight the bad guys, but now we're out of my depth at this point. I only know as much as I do about the game because when I added it a year ago, I had to play through long enough to make sure it functioned properly, write up a description about it. But it's odd, but I'm so glad we finally have it. Voyeur and Voyeur 2 speak for themselves. Again, I think they're adult-rated games, but I don't know that they're mature. I don't know that there's anything incredibly sexual about them, but it's got that whole idea of you're looking through your telescope into different people's rooms, and like maybe this guy picks up his phone and calls, and so if you switch your views, you'll notice a woman over here pick up her phone. So now you know that there's something going on between these two, and if you watch them on the timeline, you can figure out their story. But while you're focused on them, other things are happening too. So like Night Trap, like Double Switch, like a lot of these FMV games, you end up kind of playing them multiple times to piece together what's happening so that you can eventually kind of memorize the sequence of watch this. Okay, now go over here, push this button that causes this trap to open, which stops that bad guy. Come over here, see that. It's a lot of trial and error. And then, of course, at the end, Who Shot Johnny Rock? Another American Laser Games mouse shooter game. That is a brief glance at the FMV games that are in eXoDOS. When we do the Windows 3X update to Windows 3X version 3, that list is just massive. We have subgenres of interactive movies at that point. Because there's interactive movies, FMV games, there are MPC CD-ROMs, which were just mainly multimedia. You've got so much live-action video at that point that for someone like Vincent Van Vega who enjoys FMV games, that is the pack to be excited about. But we do have some pretty cool things in here. Thanks for watching the video. Appreciate you hanging out with me tonight.